For 53 years, she lived a life built on a lie. She believed she had been unwanted, abandoned by her own family. But in truth, she had been stolen. Taken from her mother's arms at just 4 years old, promised a trip to Disneyland, and never returned. She grew up on the other side of the world, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, never knowing her true name, never knowing her brothers and sisters were still waiting. Waiting, and wondering if they would ever see her again. And then, after more than half a century of silence, the truth exploded into the light. Her family never gave her up. They never stopped searching. And the little girl who vanished in 1969 was finally found. This is the Found Files, where the stories of the missing are brought back to life. If stories like this move you, don't just watch, subscribe. Because every click keeps these voices alive, and reminds the world, no one should ever vanish without being remembered. In the late 1960s, the town of Pontefract in West Yorkshire was a place of coal mines, close-knit streets, and working-class families doing their best to get by. In one of those families was a little girl named Susan Gervaise. She was just 4 years old, the youngest of 7 children, growing up in a household that was noisy, chaotic, and full of life. Her mother was raising her children alone, struggling to stretch what little she had across so many mouths. It wasn't an easy life, but it was still a family bound by love. Susan was remembered as bright, trusting, and full of energy. To her siblings, she was the baby of the family, cherished and protected in their own small way. To her mother, she was a reminder of both hardship and hope, a child who deserved more than the hand life had dealt them. But as much as her family fought to keep life together, poverty brought vulnerability. The kindness of strangers could feel like an opportunity. And in 1969, when a traveling couple entered their lives, offering what seemed like a miracle, her mother made a choice she would never forget. A choice that would change Susan's life forever. In 1969, a traveling couple crossed paths with Susan's family. They were wanderers, moving from place to place, but to Susan's mother they appeared generous, friendly, and trustworthy. They offered something she had never been able to give her daughter, a holiday abroad. They spoke of Disneyland, the trip of a lifetime. 2 weeks away, they promised. A chance for Susan to see a world of wonder and return with memories no child from Pontefract could ever dream of. Her mother hesitated. But the couple seemed kind, and the offer was too extraordinary to dismiss. To make the journey possible, Susan's birth certificate was handed over. It was an act of trust, and it was the last time her family would see her for more than 50 years. 2 weeks have passed. The excitement of waiting turned into unease. And then, silence. Susan never came home. There were no postcards, no phone calls, no knock on the door with a smiling child returning from her holiday. Her place at the table stayed empty. Her brothers and sisters grew restless with worry. Her mother, filled with regret, realized the awful truth: she had trusted the wrong people. The couple had vanished, taking Susan with them. What was supposed to be a holiday had become an abduction, hidden beneath the disguise of kindness. And in a single moment, an ordinary family was broken apart. Susan was carried away from the life she knew in Yorkshire to a world that was completely foreign. The couple who took her did not return her after 2 weeks. Instead, they crossed borders, leaving behind no trace. Her childhood unfolded thousands of miles away, first in Canada, then in Australia, later in New Zealand. With every move, the distance between Susan and her real family grew wider. She was raised to believe she had been abandoned, that she was unwanted. The truth, that she had been stolen, was kept from her. As the years passed, she built a life that felt both real and hollow. She went to school, made friends, and eventually became a wife and a mother. Outwardly, she seemed to belong. But inside, there was always an emptiness, a sense of disconnection she could never explain. She wondered why she felt like an outsider, why she had no story of her beginnings. And yet, she accepted the story she had been given, that her family had chosen not to keep her. Back in England, her real family was living with a different story. To them, she was a missing child. A little sister whose absence left a hole in their lives. A daughter who never came home. Two lives, two realities, one built on lies, the other on grief. For Susan, the years slipped by, and the past remained buried. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, no matter how much time has passed. Decades passed. Susan was no longer the little girl who had disappeared. She was a grown woman, with children and grandchildren of her own. But the cracks in her story never stopped troubling her. There were questions she could not answer. Where exactly had she come from? Why did her past feel like a blank page? And why did the details of her childhood never quite add up? Her husband encouraged her to look deeper, to reach back into the silence and find out who she really was. In the 21st century, searching for the truth had new tools, and Susan turned to the one place where lost connections are often found: social media. Through a simple post on Facebook, her story began to unravel. Her husband wrote about the young girl who had vanished in the late 1960s, taken overseas by a traveling couple. The post was shared, seen, and eventually, it reached the people it was always meant to reach. Back in Pontefract, a family recognized the details. They had never forgotten the little girl who had disappeared so suddenly. And in that moment, half a century of silence began to break. For Susan, it was the first hint that the story she had been told all her life, that she had been abandoned, was a lie. The truth was beginning to surface, and it was far more powerful and far more heartbreaking than she could ever have imagined. The messages came quickly. Names, faces, and memories began to surface from the very town where Susan had been born. Brothers and sisters who remembered the little girl who had vanished. A family that had never given up wondering what had happened to her. And with each connection, the truth unfolded: Susan had not been abandoned. She had not been unwanted. She had been stolen. Her mother, the woman she believed had let her go, had in fact spent her life haunted by that choice, by the trust she had placed in strangers who promised her daughter a holiday. For decades, her mother had lived with guilt and grief, never knowing if her little girl was alive or dead. She died without ever receiving the answer. For Susan, the revelation was overwhelming. The life she had lived, the story she had believed, had been built on deception. She had been denied her roots, her heritage, her family's love. And yet, at the same time, she was discovering something she never thought she had: a family who had never stopped waiting. It was a devastating truth, but also a liberating one. After 53 years, the silence had broken. She finally knew who she was. In 2022, more than half a century after she was taken, Susan returned to Pontefract. She was no longer the 4-year-old who had vanished, but a woman in her late 50s, carrying the weight of a lifetime lived under a false truth. Her brothers and sisters were waiting. They had grown older too, their childhoods long behind them, but the memory of their lost sister had never faded. And now, she was standing before them once again. The moment was overwhelming. There were no rehearsed words, no careful speeches. Only tears, embraces, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than any sound. For a family divided for 53 years, time seemed to collapse in that instant. The little sister they thought they had lost forever was home. It was a reunion born from tragedy, but also from resilience, proof that love can survive even the longest separation. And as Susan embraced the family she had been denied for so long, the ache of the past was met with the healing of the present. For more than 50 years, Susan lived with a story that was never hers. She was told she had been unwanted, when in truth she had been deeply loved. She was led to believe her family had let her go, when in reality they had never stopped grieving her loss. Her mother went to her grave never knowing the truth. But her brothers and sisters lived to see the day that the silence finally broke, and their sister came home. Susan's story is a reminder of how fragile trust can be, how quickly a life can be stolen, and yet, also, how hope can survive across decades, across continents, and even across death itself. And here's the hard truth: for every Susan who finds her way back, there are countless others still missing, still hidden, still waiting for someone to remember their names. This is why we tell these stories. To keep the missing alive in our memory. To make sure the world never forgets. You're watching the Found Files. If this story moved you, don't just click away. Subscribe. Share. Like. Because every time you do, you help ensure that the lost are never forgotten, and that their voices are never silenced again. Susan was missing for 53 years. But she was never forgotten. And neither should anyone else be.